evening, everybody. There are still some chairs in the front here. The standing room folks in the back would like to grab these fronts. We won't bite. Welcome. Thanks for coming. It's been a very pleasurable semester with these people, and we're glad that we get to share this evening with y'all. Tonight, a musical walk through Vienna. What you will see are pictures that I took this summer, spending some time there. When I came back, I talked to my good friend Jandra Harmon to come up with this idea. We elicited the help of some of our students, and this is what comes of it. There are some stories, a lot of things that may not be found in your average everyday music history textbook, a little bit of the juicy gossip type of things. Some great music that you wouldn't normally hear on a college campus because of the number of people you would need to put something like that on. So just enjoy it. It's supposed to be very accessible. There should be something here out there for the connoisseur, but also for the total amateur that just wants to hear some good music. So there should be something for everybody. So enjoy. Glad you're here. Thank you.
Our musical walk through Vienna begins at the city center. Taking the subway from the airport to Stephansplatz, a ride up the escalator rewards us with a wonderful view of St. Stephen's Cathedral, the cultural and geographical center of the capital. Nearly every composer who ever lived in Vienna spent some time here. For starters, Haydn served for 10 years as a choir boy in its lofts. Mozart married his dear Constanza in his chapel, and the penniless Vivaldi was carried through its doors on the way to his burial. We're excited to follow in the footsteps of the many greats who roamed this cobblestone square, but we'd better drop off our luggage before commencing with our long journey. We musicians are rather poor, so in search of some lodgings we can actually afford, we've got to get out of the city middle. The 15-minute walk northwest along the Danube is painless, though, because Mozart did the same in 1788, and for exactly the same reasons as us. In June of that year, just 3 years before his death, Mozart's financial situation became so bad that he was forced to move his family to the cheaper apartments outside of the city walls. Though only living at Währingerstrasse for about a year, he composed both his G minor symphony and his Jupiter symphony. He also started the last of 3 great operas he composed with librettist Lorenzo da Ponte, the opera Cosi, fan tutte. Though we'll be lucky enough to enjoy the entire opera next semester, the trio from the middle of the first act serves as a perfect commencement to our journey, as the sisters Dorabella and Fiordaligi wish their beloveds safe travel.
Vento, 12, it's time to begin our journey. Heading straight back into town, our first stop is on Schulstrasse, the apartment where Mozart lived longer than in any other of his 20 apartments, almost 3 years. Lots of wonderful music was composed here, not the least of which was his opera, Le Nozze di Figaro, The Marriage of Figaro. More interesting to us at this moment, though, was a special evening in February of 1785. After being inspired by a set of quartets written by his close friend, Joseph Haydn, Mozart showed his admiration by composing a set of his own and gifting them to the old master. His dedication, published with the quartets in September, reads as follows. To my dear friend Haydn, a father who had resolved to send his children out into the world took it to be his duty to confide them to the protection and guidance of a very celebrated man, especially when the latter, by good fortune, was at the same time his best friend. Here they are then, O great man and dearest friend, these 6 children of mine. You yourself, dearest friend, told me of your satisfaction with them during your last visit to the capital. It is this indulgence above all which urges me to commend them to you and encourages me to hope that they will not seem altogether unworthy of your favor. May it therefore please you to receive them kindly and to be their father, guide, and friend. From this moment, I resign to you all my rights to them, begging you, however, to look indulgently upon the defects which the partiality of a father's eye may have concealed from me, and in spite of them, to continue in your generous friendship for him who so greatly values it, in expectation of which I am, with all my heart, your most sincere friend, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Lovely, yes? A little quirky for sure, calling his quartets his children, but that's Mozart for you. The last visit to the capital, to which Mozart refers, was that special evening in February. Haydn was staying a couple blocks away over at the Esterházy Palace in Wallenstrasse, the Vienna lodgings of his longtime employer. On the evening of the 12th, he came over to the Mozart apartment and was treated to these special string quartets, the viola parts played by Wolfie himself, and the first violin parts by his visiting father Leopold, who had recently arrived from Salzburg. Near the end of this unbelievable evening, Haydn took Leopold aside to whisper these unforgettable words. Before God and as an honest man, I tell you that your son is the greatest composer known to me, either in person or by name. He has taste, and furthermore, the most profound knowledge of composition. Coming from arguably the most famous composer in Europe at the time, I'm sure Mozart's father and his primary teacher stood just a tad bit taller that evening. We'll take a listen to just a snippet of the last of these quartets, just so none of you get the impression that Mozart's music is all easy listening.
For the 1780s, isn't it? So edgy, in fact, that the original publisher sent the work back to Mozart, demanding that he corrected the wrong notes. The nerve of some people, right? Well, regardless of its underappreciation in its time, it certainly points directly towards the experiments of another composer just 2 miles north and 100 years later, one Arnold Schönberg. In 1903, he and his wife Matilda moved into their apartment on Liechtensteinstrasse just 2 years after their marriage. It was there that Schönberg took his soon-to-be famous pupils Anton Webern and Alban Berg, and also began his painting lessons from the young artist Richard Gertzel, a forerunner of the German expressionist style. It didn't take long after the painting lessons with Mr. Goetzel began that he began sleeping with Arnold's wife Matilda, an affair that lasted a number of years. In August of 1908, right in the middle of composing his second-string quartet, Schönberg discovered Richard and Matilda in, shall we say, a compromising situation, prompting the lovers to flee the city together. With his wife away and his marriage shattered, Schönberg adds a soprano to the last movement of the quartet, famously breaking common tone practice tonality with these words. Though Schönberg's student Webern convinced Matilda to return to her husband, she continued her affair with Mr. Goetzel up until the sad day in November of that same year, when Richard, now ostracized from Schönberg's artistic circle, destroyed the paintings he had in his studio before hanging himself. Though Schönberg's break with tonality coincides with a tumultuous home life, his music was by no means the result of a psychotic break or deep depression. On the contrary, Schönberg's new language was the culmination of more than 100 years of experimentation. Composers had been filling the balloon of tonality with newer and newer controlled dissonances until it inevitably burst, liberating the dissonances to be used freely and unabashedly. This emancipation of the dissonance, as Schönberg described it, is hands down the single most important shift in musical thinking at the beginning of the 20th century, providing us transcendent works like his Pierrot lunaire, written 4 years later.
Den Wein, den man mit Augen trinkt, gießt nachts der Mond in die Wogen nieder. Und ein Schritt vor dem schweren Horizont.
Enough Schönberg for one evening? We're all ready for the remaining 20 movements. No, fair enough. Just try not to write off this music completely. Instead, try to think of different types of music the same way we think of different types of food. Some types we eat every day. Some we only eat on special occasions. To some types we have to develop an acquired taste. And others are palatable on first tasting. Though Schönberg is probably not any of y'all's comfort food, a moderate portion of caviar or escargot once in a while won't kill you either. That said, even the most refined taste buds still rejoice when they get to delve into a big plate of mac and cheese. And what better musical comfort food than the creative, yet wonderfully accessible Joseph Haydn. A scenic 3-mile walk down the since-removed city wall gets us to the last home of our famous composer, his residence for the last decade or so of his life. Having visited Vienna numerous times in his younger years, Papa Haydn, as he was called, made the city his permanent home in 1795, after 2 long and exhausting trips to London. While living in the 2-story house in a lovely backyard garden, he composed his 2 great oratorios, The Creation and The Seasons, along with a short Emperor's Hymn, which is now the national anthem of Germany, and the last piece he played on the piano before collapsing to his eventual deathbed. A week before his death, in late May of 1809, as the French army bombarded the capital city, Napoleon himself had an honor guard placed outside of the composer's home out of respect to the dying master. While stationed outside Haydn's house, one of the French officers sang Papa an aria from The Creation, the last song he heard. The event was described by a close friend. The officer sang in such a manly way, with such sublimity and with such truth of expression and genuine feeling for music, that Haydn could not hold back tears of joy, and not only told the singer, but afterwards many other people, that he could recall no voice and no song that had ever given him so much pleasure. When he died a week later, the body of the beloved composer was transported through the battle lines to his burial ground, the Austrian honor guard taking the casket from the French soldiers at the line. He stayed there for 11 years, until his body, well, most of his body, it's a bizarre story that is worth looking up, was moved to his final resting place in Eisenstadt, the residence for his longtime employers, the Esterházys. Let's enjoy that final song Haydn heard, with all of its truth and expression and genuine feeling, the tenor aria from The Creation.
30-minute walk back towards the city middle will take us from one last residence to another, the last apartment of Haydn's most famous pupil, Ludwig van Beethoven. Back in 1792, the young Beethoven got permission from the Elector in Bonn, his boss at the time, to move to Vienna so that he could take lessons with the master himself. Just a year into his tutelage, Haydn became so distressed with Beethoven's financial situation that he wrote a secret letter on behalf of his student and sent it to Bonn, assuring the Elector that his young pupil had great talent but needed a bigger salary in order to survive in Vienna without incurring debts. Haydn's letter begins, "I am taking the liberty of sending your reverence, in all humility, a few pieces of music, a quintet, an oboe concerto, a set of variations for the piano, and a fugue, composed by my dear pupil Beethoven, who was so graciously entrusted to me. They will, I flatter myself, be graciously accepted by your reverence as evidence of his diligence." The letter continues, asking the Elector for a substantial increase in his pupil's purported salary. Beethoven had told Haydn he received only 500 florins per year, and humbly concludes, "In hopes that your reverence will graciously accept this request of mine on behalf of my dear pupil, I am, with deepest respect, your reverence's most humble and obedient servant, Joseph Haydn." Needless to say, you can imagine Papa Haydn's shock when the following letter arrives from the Elector in Bonn. "The music of young Beethoven, which you have sent me, I received with your letter. Since, however, this music, with the exception of the fugue, was composed and performed here in Bonn before he departed on his journey to Vienna, I cannot regard it as progress made. As far as the allotment which he has had for his subsistence in Vienna, it does indeed amount to only 500 florins. But in addition to this 500 florins, his salary here of 400 florins has been continuously paid to him. He received 900 florins for the year. I cannot, therefore, very well see why he is as much in arrears in his finances as you say. I am wondering, therefore, whether he had not better come back here in order to resume his work, for I very much doubt that he has made any important progress in composition and in the development of his musical taste during his present stay, and I fear that he will bring back nothing but debt." We can all be assured that the students sitting in the audience here tonight are much more honest with their private teachers than Beethoven was with his, can we not? Yes. Okay. Lying about salary, asking for loans which would never be repaid, and pawning off old compositions as new ones are certainly grounds for lifelong distrust and detestation. But Papa Haydn was an amiable, forgiving soul. Though his lessons with Beethoven certainly stopped, Haydn didn't harbor ill feelings towards his pupil, and the two remained friendly throughout the rest of Haydn's life.
Of course, it's just speculation, but perhaps Beethoven's dissatisfaction with Haydn's teaching was due to Ludwig's penchant for the creative, the new, and the cutting edge. While Haydn was making his pupil study the strict rules of counterpoint in Johann Fuchs's Gradus ad Parnassum, exercises that some music theory and history students apparently still do to this day, the rebellious Beethoven was in search of new forms of expression, sounds existing nowhere but in his mind's ear. He would spend hours, sometimes entire days, walking around the then undeveloped northern part of the city, scribbling musical ideas in his little black book, dealing with the torrent of emotion his worsening deafness brought upon him. It was in this part of the city, a little region called Heiligenstadt, that he put to words his internal struggles. "O ye men, who think or say that I am malevolent, stubborn, or misanthropic, how greatly do ye wrong me. You do not know the secret causes of it seeming so. From childhood, my heart and mind were disposed to the gentle feelings of goodwill. I was ever eager to accomplish great deeds, but for 6 years now I have been a hopeless case, aggravated by senseless physicians, cheated year after year in the hope of improvement, finally compelled to face the prospect of a lasting malady. Born with an ardent and lively temperament, even susceptible to the diversions of society, I was compelled early to isolate myself, to live in loneliness. When I at times tried to forget all this, oh, how harshly was I repulsed by the doubly sad experience of my bad hearing, and yet it was impossible for me to say to men, 'Speak louder, shout, for I am deaf.' Ah, how could I possibly admit such an infirmity in the one sense which should have been more perfect in me than in others, a sense which I once possessed in highest perfection, a perfection such as few surely in my profession enjoy or have enjoyed. What humiliation when one stood beside me and heard a flute in the distance and I heard nothing, or someone heard the shepherd singing and again I heard nothing. Such incidents brought me to the verge of despair, but little more and I would have put an end to my life. It was only my art that held me back. It seemed impossible to leave the world until I had produced all that I felt called upon to produce. Divine One, thou lookest into my inmost soul. Thou knowest it, thou knowest that love of man and desire to do good live therein. O men, when some day you read these words, reflect that ye did me wrong, and let the unfortunate one comfort himself and find one of his kind, who despite all obstacles of nature did all that was in his power to be accepted among worthy artists and men.
We can all be thankful that his emotional crisis in 1802 did not lead to a premature death. That on the contrary, his renewed spirit prompted the start of a new work, his Third Symphony, Eroica, a work that assured his acceptance among worthy artists and men for all time. Back on the Schwanengesang in Beethoven's final apartment, with eternal fame well in hand by this time in his life, we are privy to the sounds of his late period, a period of unbridled emotionalism and groundbreaking expression. It was here that he composed and rehearsed many of his late string quartets, some of the most creative and transcendent sounds ever put to paper. Originally written as the final movement of his B-flat major quartet, but published separately due to the publisher's fears, his Große Fuge serves as a wonderful representative example of the late Beethoven, described as inaccessible, incomprehensible, eccentric, and even the most problematic single work in Beethoven's output, and doubtless the entire literature of music. Of art are not understood in their time. The 20th century composer Igor Stravinsky best described the fugue. It is an absolutely contemporary piece of music that will be contemporary forever. Beethoven died on a stormy March night in his apartment on Schwanengesang, and over 20,000 people gathered at the Alsochacha, just a few blocks away to witness the funeral procession.
One of the 20,000 people at Beethoven's funeral, indeed, one of the pallbearers carrying the coffin, was the frail, sickly, glasses-wearing 30-year-old composer named Franz Schubert. He lived his entire life around Vienna, studying under Antonio Salieri, and as a child, and working under the shadow of Beethoven as an adult. Soon after Beethoven's death, Schubert moved over to Kettenbrückengasse to his last apartment, a 30-minute walk from the church. Not even a year later, and already on his deathbed, Schubert made his final musical request to hear a performance of one of Beethoven's late-string quartets, his Opus 131 in C-sharp minor, a work that Schubert admired above all others. When Schubert died in November of 1828, his dying wish was to be buried next to his idol. And there they laid, for some 60 years, Schubert next to Beethoven, until the late 1880s, when both he and Beethoven were moved to their final resting place in the Central Cemetery. This is a place that we'll visit a little later in our journey. Though still near each other to this day, they're unfortunately no longer next to one another, as Schubert wished, for shame. Schubert died extremely young, but he did make the most of his short 31 years of life, especially in the genre of Lied, a genre that he almost single-handedly raised to the artistic heights it enjoys today. His Doppelgänger, the second to last in his famous Schwanengesang cycle, and undoubtedly one of the last pieces, if not the very last, he composed. This serves as a poignant example of his unparalleled talents in depicting the emotions behind a text.
in
With all this doom and gloom, it's probably time for an ice cream. No one makes ice cream better than the Italians, so a short mile walk back to the city center will bring us to our starting point, where thousands of tourists line up to savor the interesting flavors of gelato. While we enjoy our 3 scoops of hazelnut, amaretto, and coconut, we can poke our heads into the lobby of the Hotel Royal, a fancy hotel within a rock's throw of St. Stephen's Cathedral. Though we probably can't afford to sleep here either, at least we can take a look at the piano Wagner used to compose his Meistersinger from 1862 to 1864. He was living about 5 miles away at the time, but ended up gifting his piano to the then manager of the hotel. Here's the opening chorus to that 4-hour opera, music that almost certainly was composed at this very piano.
Speaking of operas in German, our friend Wolfgang wrote one right around the corner over on Milchgasse in 1781. He had just moved to Vienna and was renting from Frau Weber, the mother of 4 daughters, one of whom was named Costanza. You can see where this is headed. As the rumors of their relationship began to spread, Mozart moved to another apartment down the street in an attempt to stave off any premarital accusations. His comic opera, The Abduction from the Serail, was completed the following year. It was a huge success. Premiered at the Würd Theater, with Mozart conducting in July of 1782. The theater that Figaro and Cosi would also be premiered. Within a month after the premiere, the suddenly very wealthy young Mozart was married to his landlord's daughter. By far the most famous moment of the comic opera is an aria sung by the main character, named Costanza after his bride-to-be. At the premiere, it must have been Costanza's aria that prompted the now infamous response from Emperor Joseph II.
viele Noten. It's actually too beautiful for our ears, Mr. Mozart, and too many notes.
4 years later, and 3 miles out of the city, Mozart would again perform a comic opera for the emperor, this time at Joseph's humble little summer cottage, called Schönbrunn. In February of 1786, the emperor organized an opera competition between Mozart and the leading opera composer of the day, the Italian Antonio Salieri. Though the emperor preferred Salieri's first the music, then the words over Mozart's The Impresario, time has chosen Mozart opera as the champion. Here's the highlight of that one-act work when 2 sopranos argue over who gets to be the prima donna.
Ich bin die erste Sängerin, ich bin die erste Sängerin, ich bin die erste, ich bin die erste,
All good things sadly have to come to an end. And indeed, Mozart's short life was one of those things. In late September of 1790, Mozart moved into his final apartment, just a 5-minute walk from Milchgasse. While putting the finishing touches on his last opera, The Magic Flute, in July of 1891, his 6th and final child was born. Franz Zephyr Wolfgang, one of their 6 children, and one of only 2 that survived to adulthood. It was at this apartment that the 35-year-old Mozart was visited by an anonymous messenger with a commission for a Requiem Mass. After the Magic Flute's premiere in late September, Mozart worked almost exclusively on his commission until he became too weak in late November and was confined to his bed. Many of its movements were left unfinished at his death on December the 5th. The Lacrymosa, for instance, stops after the first 8 bars. Given at St. Stephen's on December the 6th. On the way to the mass grave in the cemetery at St. Mark's, nearly 3 miles outside of the city. No marker was originally placed on his grave, and so when the first monument was erected some 60 years later, the exact location was mere speculation. After moving the original monument to the central cemetery in the late 1890s, and leaving the site again markerless, a cemetery attendant gathered the broken monuments from around the cemetery and constructed his own makeshift memorial. That is the monument that remains today. The Requiem, though unfinished, was premiered 4 days after his burial at St. Michael's. This is a 5-minute walk from his final apartment, and incidentally, the final resting place of the important poet Pietro Metastasio, and adjacent to the attic apartment lived in by a starving, penniless, desolate Haydn. 2 striking plaques inside the church serve to merely commemorate its premiere. Mr. Mozart wasn't the only fellow in Vienna to write a requiem. A 15-minute walk directly through the city middle brings us to the Postgasse, and one of the only surviving apartments lived in by Johannes Brahms in the late 1860s. It was there that the middle-aged Brahms put the finishing touches on his piano 4-hands arrangement of his recently completed German Requiem, an arrangement prepared specifically for his dear friend Clara Schumann. The second movement of this masterpiece, Denn alles Fleisch, es ist den Gras, reworked some previous material written in 1854, the year that Robert Schumann attempted suicide, and Brahms moved in with the Schumann family to help Clara with her young children.
Is the closest we'll come to the Danube River. So while we're here, we ought to walk the 2 extra blocks and sneak a peek. Sorry to say it's not the prettiest thing in the world at this particular place. It's fitting though, since the same year Johannes moved into the apartment, another mustached and bearded gentleman was composing a short little waltz on this very subject. The dapper Johann Strauss Jr. was a close friend of Brahms, and though Brahms was quite popular in his time, his popularity in the city could never rival that of the Vienna-born waltz king. 5 years after the premiere of Brahms' Requiem, and 20 minutes of walking time takes us to a very important evening in that life of Mr. Strauss Jr. The premiere of his comic opera, Die Fledermaus, at the Theater an der Wien. This was by no means the first important premiere to be staged at the theater. Built in 1801 by Mozart's friend, Emanuel Schikaneder, the librettist of the Magic Flute, who was also the first to play Papageno, the theater was home to the premieres of Beethoven's Fidelio, Second Symphony, and the Eroica. On one special evening in December of 1808, Beethoven himself conducted the premiere of the 5th Symphony, the 6th Symphony, 4th Piano Concerto, and his choral fantasy. It's certainly one of the most important musical sites for many composers in Vienna. But tonight, however, it's an all-Strauss program at the Theater. The premiere of his Fledermaus went extraordinarily well and has been a staple on the stage ever since. Here's the middle of Act 1, as Eisenstein, his wife Rosalinda, and their maid Adela all pretend to commiserate with each other over their pretended sorrows while attempting to hide their excitement over a party later that evening.
To part is such sweet sorrow, such pain, such despair.
What good is all this fretting? There's nothing we can do.
I find it most upsetting that I feel that they do. Can't we live until we meet again, until we meet morning's grace my heart to love each place my heart. Oh, goodness me, what misery, oh, dreadful of calamity. Oh, goodness me, what misery, oh, goodness gracious me.
Not 5 minutes from the Theater an der Wien stands another important concert house, the Vienna Staatsoper. It was here that the 37-year-old Gustav Mahler took the baton in directorship of the then called Hofoper, perhaps the most illustrious music position in all of Europe. With anti-Semitic feelings already quite prevalent during the time, the Jewish Mahler was forced to convert to Catholicism before finally being offered the job in 1897. 10 years, he held the coveted position until the anti-Semitic attacks finally took their toll, at which time he left for America, serving as the conductor for the New York Philharmonic and the Metropolitan Opera, among other places. And his 3 taxing years in America secured his place in history as both a conductor and a composer, highlighted by the premiere of his 8th Symphony, the last premiere he would hear in his lifetime. At the end of his 8th Symphony, written back in Austria while still working at the Hofoper, Mahler sets the final words to Goethe's Faust. clinging to his wife Alma, even after her husband discovered her having an affair. It is truly a magnificent statement of redemption and is rightly described as a defining human statement for its century. Mahler unfortunately didn't live too long after the premiere, though. The sickness related to his defective heart valves took his life in May of 1911, just 2 months after leaving America, but 7 days after reaching Vienna. He died in a sanatorium less than 2 miles from his old workplace and was buried in a lovely cemetery 4 miles north of town with Arnold Schönberg and Austrian painter Gustav Klimt at his small graveside service.
Is anybody else a little winded after that dancing around? That was a little warm. All right. As we get on the S-Bahn near the Grünzig Cemetery to make our way to the much larger Central Cemetery, the penultimate stop on our musical journey, we can only mention the many other important composers that lived and worked in this great city. Anton Bruckner lived in the city over 30 years, composing the final 8 of his 9 mammoth symphonies here. Anton Dvorak loved to visit the capital, staying frequently at the Hotel of the Golden Lamb, right across the street from the Theater an der Wien. Christoph Willibald von Gluck was the Kapellmeister at the Karlskirche, the very same church that Gustav and Alma Mahler would be married. Antonio Vivaldi's original burial ground is right around the corner. Shortly after moving to Vienna, his patron and employer died, leaving him without a steady income. The penniless Vivaldi died within a year. Both of Schönberg's important pupils, Anton Webern and Alban Berg, were born and lived in Vienna. Berg dedicated one of his most important works to the daughter of Alma Mahler and her lover, and Webern was accidentally killed by an American soldier at the end of World War II. György Ligeti fled Hungary for Vienna in the mid-1950s and lived there 50 years, his music living on through the soundtracks of numerous Stanley Kubrick films. Antonio Salieri, in addition to writing almost 40 operas and teaching the boy Schubert, went stark mad near the end of his life and claims to have killed Mozart, a claim that has absolutely no historical credibility, but makes for a great story. Franz von Soave wrote even more than Salieri in terms of operas, but will seemingly be known for mainly the one tune from one operetta. Like Schubert, Hugo Wolf lived nearly his entire life in Vienna and added much to the Lied repertoire, attempting suicide after a mental collapse caused by syphilis, just like Robert Schumann. He checked himself into an asylum at 38 and died 5 years later. Yet of all of these composers we visited tonight, who gets the dominant place in the composer's corner at the Central Cemetery? Is it Schubert? Or Strauss? Certainly not Schönberg, but Brahms? How about Beethoven himself? No. It's Johannes, Chrysostomos, Wolfgangus, Amadeus, Mozart. That's who. It's Wolfie, whose smiling mug is on every chocolate wrapper. It's Gottlieb on the magnets, t-shirts, and every other trinket sold in the sea of souvenir shops. It's Mozart, who will forever be the Viennese most favorite son. And with compositions of such sublimity and grace, how can we blame them?
and many composers. And what better way to end such an exhausting day than with a couple cold German beers at a little bar over on Ungargasse, not far from the middle of the city and the beginning of this crazy day. Above us, while sipping on our frosty Dunkelweizen, we can imagine Beethoven during the winter of 1823, scribbling furiously the tenor solo and choral entrance of the last symphony he would ever complete.
Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. The words will be on the screen.